love following the markets. It's not a full-time job for me, but it's a hobby. And one thing that I really like about following the markets is that there are a ton of really smart people who are constantly sharing their perspective of what's going to happen with companies and stock prices and the market in general. While I like listening to that, I also like poking into my own companies to form my own opinions. By paying just a little bit of attention, you can learn some cool, interesting, nuanced things about companies. For example, over the next couple of years, Disney's adding 2 cruise ships to their fleet in 2025 and then another one in 2026. They're doubling their worldwide cruise capacity. And while I don't really know what to do with this information, I find it intriguing because had you asked me a couple weeks before this, I would have said that cruises were still suffering and reeling post-COVID. But now hearing that Disney's literally doubling down on their capacity for cruises is making me rethink, maybe I was wrong about the cruise industry right now, and it's just a different perspective. But in order to even put oneself in a position to process all of this information, there needs to be a pretty good system in place so that you're following companies and it's not too big of a pain to go read through their financials or hear their earnings calls and all of the good stuff where these nuggets are buried. And that's what this video is all about. I spent the last couple of years trying to develop the perfect system for me to monitor and research companies. I'm finally there, and it's 100% completely free. Setting some expectations really quickly, I had set the gold standard for myself in terms of investing tools with Capital IQ and Bloomberg Terminal. I think if people are paying for both of those, they have a ton of knowledge and news coming their way. It's just prohibitively expensive for a hobbyist investor. You're talking about both those combined costing tens of thousands of dollars a year just for access to the platform. I can't justify that. So knowing I couldn't get those two things, I was looking for a way to get as close to that as possible and in a serviceable way. And I knew generally what I was looking for. One thing would be I wanted to research financials of companies just like Cap IQ and have it organized in a way that I could get a glimpse of what's been happening in trends over the last couple of years. I knew I liked the tracking element of Bloomberg and being able to get news quickly and stay up to speed on companies. When I really filtered it down, I realized that I want just a consolidated way to first screen for companies, then do a little bit more diligence about the companies, and then stay on top of the companies. And that's really what all 3 of these tools that I'm going to talk about do. And the tools that I'm talking about today are TIKR, QUARTR, and Finviz. Perhaps you've heard of all 3, perhaps you don't know any of them, and I'm going to introduce you to them. And then when I introduce you to these platforms and give you a quick overview, I'll let you know how I use them in my day-to-day as I'm paying attention to different companies. TIKR is friggin' awesome. And the fact that there's a free tier on this is unbelievable. Now, I personally use TIKR to get up to speed on companies, and in terms of diligence and research, this out of the 3 is certainly where I spend the most time. Now, you'll see in a second why I spend so much time on QUARTR, but for the most part, if I'm doing any sort of diligence or research, then you will find me in the TIKR Terminal app. For me, researching and staying on companies means reading through financials, compiling metrics over time, reviewing earnings calls and filings, and potentially monitoring estimates. I didn't expect to get all of this in one place, but TIKR delivers it and more. I'll show you a couple tools that I use weekly that you can quickly get up to speed with and try on your own when you're using the TIKR app. One thing that's really nice is there's historical stock price where you can download all of this information into a CSV. You can also add multiple tickers to the chart so you can compare stock prices and download that super easily. This is nice to have in a bunch of different apps, but it's still a box to check to make sure TIKR has it, and they do it in a really nice user experience. There are these great snapshot views where you can see all high-level metrics. For example, you can see detailed financial statements over time, and these metrics include ratios. Not only that, you can graph these ratios with one click over time, and then you can start to add different companies to the graphs. So here, let's take a look at Disney's gross margin versus Apple's gross margin. You'll notice when I'm comparing these types of ratios, I'm not trying to develop some crazy investment thesis right now. Again, I'm just trying to orient myself. So I want to know gross margin. I like picking a bunch of different companies, orienting myself that way, seeing if it makes sense. And then sometimes I'll throw up a bunch of different companies that are different sizes within an industry to see if there's anything that jumps out about gross margin. Maybe there are smaller companies that have much better gross margin, etc. So in the beginning, I'm poking around and just having fun with this type of stuff and looking to see if anything starts to jump out, or then I would investigate it further. And that's where I would start to do things like look into the financial statements or read the annual filings or whatever. And all of that stuff is also available on TIKR. So it's a great one-stop shop for what's going on. There's really too much to show about this platform for you to get the full picture in one short video. So what I would recommend is you start a free account and you poke around yourself and you see what tools they have. And I think that the best part of TIKR is the intuitive user experience. So you're able to get a bunch of information filtered down super quickly, and that'll just help you feel empowered about the decisions that you're making. And if you are from TIKR, please hook me up with a premium account so I can try all of these added benefits like following the top hedge fund trades. I spend most of my research time in TIKR, but I spend a ton of other time in QUARTR. Possibly more time in QUARTR than in TIKR, because what QUARTR does is it allows you to listen to earnings calls. This might not sound like much, but for me, staying on top of companies through earnings calls used to be so daunting. I don't want to read all the transcripts. I want to listen to them when it's convenient, like if I'm on a longer drive or if I'm on a walk. And before, it would be like impossible for me to go to their websites, find the earnings calls, download the earnings calls, access them offline, etc. But QUARTR makes this incredibly easy. So I found myself in QUARTR, following a bunch of different companies, listening to their most recent earnings calls, and that's where I got the fact about Disney Cruise Lines. If you listen to Disney's most recent earnings call, then in the first 5 minutes, Bob Iger's talking about what they're doing with cruises. So download QUARTR, it is free, and you can start listening to their earnings calls, and it doesn't take a bunch of time. And for me, it's just as interesting as listening to some sort of podcast or whatever. Maybe that's just nerdy, but I find it super valuable. The last one I want to talk about is Finviz. You may already be familiar with Finviz, and I just want to tell you the way that I use it. So Finviz is really, really good for screening companies. You can screen by company size, industry, earnings growth over the last couple of years, revenue growth, etc. And so you can see, like, in the system, what I would do is I would look for general companies on Finviz that meet certain criteria. Then I could go pay a little bit more attention to them in TIKR. And if I wanted to get up to speed and do more diligence, I would load them up into QUARTR and I would listen to their most recent earnings calls. I find this to be a really good system. The other thing that I want to highlight about Finviz is that they can map out your portfolio. So if you go in there and you put in like your actual how much you have of each stock and how many shares and what price you bought into, they will show you what your portfolio looks like in a nice heated map version. And for me, this was really eye-opening because it made me realize that I didn't have certain sectors covered as much as I would have thought. So of course, then what I do is I go into Finviz Screener, I look in that industry or similar industries like energy, find a bunch of different companies from different sizes, throw those into TIKR to orient myself with the space. From TIKR, maybe find 2 or 3 that I really like, and then bring those into QUARTR, listen to them in QUARTR, and then boom, we're up to speed on a few different companies and might have an opinion. Now, this definitely doesn't mean that you know what's going to happen to the stock or what's going to happen in the future with the company or whatever, but it is a way for you to feel more empowered about the decisions that you're making. I use these tools to keep a well-rounded, diversified portfolio. It makes me feel a little bit more in control and deliberate about what I'm doing. And if you are interested in doing this, all of these tools are completely free. There are paid tiers for each of them, but I would recommend checking them out because I found them to be very valuable and I'm really happy with the system that's in place right now. If you have other recommendations for tools that you like, please leave them in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.